Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our presentation on the easy guide to the draft third cycle River Basin Management Plan. The talks this afternoon are split in several sections. So we start off with an introduction, followed about what we know about the problem we have, how did the problem get there, where is it coming from, what can we do, what have we already done? And this section will be the talk by my colleague Mary Toland. And then you come back to me for a couple of more slides on implementation and what each of us can do to improve and protect and restore our water environment. So let's start then. Most of you will be aware that the draft River Basin Management Plan was published for consultation on the 9th of April this year. And the consultation documents consist of three main sections. We have the draft plan document itself, which is accompanied by various supporting documents. And we also have the NIA Catchment data map viewer. And these three sections can be accessed on the Dara web page, and I've given the links below here. So we are today holding this presentation to stakeholders. And as Rob already mentioned, the consultation closes on the 10th of October this year. And the final River Basin Management Plan will then be published by 9th of April next year. So throughout this presentation, I will signpost you to the various chapters in the draft plan to make it easy for you to look up a bit more detail if you're interested in it. And I will also point out the program of measures using the green hexagon, a bit like the buzzard columns of the Giant's Causeway. So watch out for the blue boxes and the green hexagons. Okay, then, we know we have a problem. Really, the status of our water quality or our water bodies is stagnating. Overall, only 38% of our water bodies are at good or better status, and our aim was to have 70% of our water bodies at good status. So it's very clear we are not going to achieve this aim. So while some water bodies have improved in status, that was unfortunately offset by deteriorations in other areas. So the next 4 slides look at our water bodies and their summary statistics. So this slide is about rivers, and we have in total 450 river water bodies, which are classified into 5 groups. And we usually report on them in a simplified summary of good or better status or moderate or worse status. So if we look at the most current data and the last data before, you can see that the number of water bodies at good status is stagnating and even a little bit deteriorating. And if we look at the changes in status between those 2 reporting periods, and then the simplification, we can see that 23 river water bodies improved from moderate or worse to good or better, but that was offset by 32 water bodies that deteriorated. So moving on to lakes, we have 21 lakes, which we classify into 5 status classes. And if we look at the 2 reporting periods, we can see there was a considerable drop of the number of lakes that are at good or better status. And if we look at the summary of deteriorations, we see that 4 lakes deteriorated from good or better to moderate or worse. So how does the picture look like for our transitional and coastal water bodies? We have 25 of those, and once again, they are classified in 5 status classes. And if we look at the summary statistics, there was a slight improvement of the number of water bodies that are now at good or better status. And if we look at the summary here, 1 water body dropped from good or better status, whereas 2 improved. And the last group of water bodies is groundwater. We have 75 groundwater bodies in Northern Ireland. And in contrast to surface water, groundwater is classified using 2 status classes, so just good or poor. If you look at the summary statistics, you can see there were improvements. And even here, looking at the water bodies that improved, we have 14, but there's a big note of caution here. Most of these improvements are due to changes in the monitoring network. or the monitoring data collection, so they can't be attributed one-to-one to improvements in the water environment. So the Water Framework Directive regulations also ask us to look at the protected areas in Northern Ireland that are dependent on the water environment. So the protected areas we are considering are those that are designated for the protection of habitats or species like SPAs and SACs, groundwater dependent terrestrial ecosystem, bathing waters, shellfish waters, and drinking water protected areas. So as an example, I picked here drinking water protected areas. And this map shows that approximately 8% of our drinking water protected areas for groundwaters are currently failing to achieve good status. So moving on then to the next section, how did the problem get there? You might be aware that environmental risk is assessed using the source pathway receptor model. And this model explains the environmental linkages. So for example, if you have a spill at the surface, this chemical can soak into the soil and the underlying groundwater and then travel with the groundwater through the rocks and reach a receptor, for example, an abstraction borehole as a agri-food business. If we can split those linkages between either source and pathway or pathway and receptor, we have mitigated the risk. The problem is that, for example, in groundwater is both a pathway and a receptor. So the only options we have is looking at measures that control the source. So we can either eliminate or minimize the source. And that's where also protection guidelines, good codes of practice, and so on come in. A similar story is by pressures resulting from land use activities. As an example, we have your slurry spreading and the runoff from a sloping field, which then reaches our water bodies. And well, we can't change the geography, the slope of this field won't change. So hence, there are limitations on what we can do there before it reaches the waterway. So once again, we are kind of left with looking at the source. And for example, buffer strips, you're kind of minimizing the source close to the at-risk area. So it kind of looks at both the source and the pathway a bit. But really, what the previous slides, I showed you the results of our monitoring and the classification and the status, and that we are not achieving our objectives. And really, those slides show us we have a problem at the receptor. And we now use the source pathway receptor model to work backwards where those pressures are coming from. A lot of our monitoring data show us that we have especially pressures from nutrients, and we then work backwards and look at our source pathway receptor models and find that the main pressures related to nutrients are either from sewage-related pressures and infrastructure or agricultural land uses. So as a next step, we can then we think these are the sources. So what data do we have that relate to these sources and underpin that we pick the right source pathway receptor linkage? So if we start with the sewage pressures, we know that we have capacity issues in about 100 locations across Northern Ireland. So in these villages and towns and settlements, we are at capacity or very close to capacity of either the sewage network or the wastewater treatment works, and it means there are no new connections possible. It also means that during heavy rainfall events, it's much more likely to get overspills of untreated sewage into our water environment. We also know that we had an underfunding of the PC15 business plan, so hence there are pressures remaining. And then AFBI and their research partners carried out a so-called Refocus project, which was published last autumn, where they looked at the P-flow analysis in the Northern Irish system. And they were able to attribute 24% of the phosphorus released to the water environment to wastewater treatment facilities, and a further 12% were attributed to septic tanks. So let's look at agricultural pressures on the other hand then. So we know that we had an increased use of chemical fertilizers and concentrated feedstuffs during the last years. So if we look at chemical fertilizers, while those inputs declined dramatically between 2003 and 2009, they have then increased again before leveling off again between 2014 and 15 and 16, 19. So a minimum input was just reached about 6 years ago when we were looking at the results of the first plan and setting out our targets for the second plan, but then increased again. And for the feedstuff inputs, they were declining between 2006 and 2008, but have been increasing since then again. So this results in higher concentrations of P contained in the slurry, which is then being applied to soils. And we also know from soil sampling studies in selected catchments that we have an oversupply of P in soils, which sometimes can be up to 20%. Other evidence relating to the source comes from our integrated ecosystem modeling of Dundrum Bay, and was possible to show that 80% of the microbial loading from ruminant sources is from ruminant sources, and that was in the Carrick's rivers. But it means that the other, with the microbial loading comes also nutrient input from those sources. And once again, looking at the P-flow analysis from the Refocus project, like done over here, it was possible to attribute over 60% of the P losses to water bodies to the agricultural sector. So what can we do then? Chapter 9 of the draft plan is all about the draft program of measures, and it's divided into key sectors. And I will now go through the key sectors and give just one example of a successful measure for each of those sectors. So the first sector is agriculture, and an example measure would be to work with the industry to reduce the phosphorus content in animal feed. The second sector is urban development, and an example measure is to develop an integrated ecosystem model for Loch Foyle, Belfast Loch, and Carlingford Loch to inform consenting decisions and investment prioritization. The third sector is drinking water, chemicals, and pesticides. And an example measure would be to carry out a public sector estate pilot of pesticide reduction or elimination. The fourth sector is abstraction, fisheries, and morphology. And an example is to carry out a review of groundwater abstractions and their compliance monitoring data in groundwater bodies that fail for saline intrusion. The fifth sector is non-native invasive species, forestry, waste and contaminated land. An example is for Dara to prepare an outline business case to assess the resources required to inform any future decision on the implementation of a contaminated land regulatory regime for Northern Ireland. And the sixth one is simply called ASA, and an example is to develop site-specific conservation management plans for freshwater and marine protected areas. And at this stage, the next section is what have we already done. I hand over to my colleague Mary, who will present on that.
Hello. So the River Basin Management Plan implementation then is Chapter 8 of the consultation document. So the presentation is divided up into 3 sections. What we have done in the second cycle, which was 2015 right through to 2021. Then I'll give you a bit of background on the catchment investigations and how we get out there and see what the problems are. And then I'll hand you back to Silke with just one slide on prioritising and planning for the next cycle. So what we have done in the second cycle. In Water Management Unit, we're responsible for the conservation of the water resources, and this can be a balancing act because we're obviously wanting to still produce food, clean drinking water, go everybody now that they're holidaying at home and sea swim and get out into the waterways while looking after all of the biodiversity and the amenities. So we all know how important the water is to us, but then it's the amount of pressures that are on that throughout the years. So back in the day when you had mills put in and there were weirs that are obstructing fish passage and a lot of land drainage schemes so it could produce more food. So the rivers have been deepened and taken away from their floodplains. And this impacts them by having a lot of silt in the channel as well. And then a lot of enrichment if rivers are being worked right to the edge too. Also in urban areas, you maybe have channels that are completely culverted, so you're not going to get the same kind of ecology in those either. So we do have our work cut out for us. As Silke was saying, if you're controlling the pressures at source, then you can prevent pollution. But to go about doing that whenever we're a small group of people in one office, you know, is very difficult. So it's up to everybody out on the ground to do their part. So the pressures like in the urban areas where you maybe have misconnections, if people are reporting those straight away, then it means that we're able to get out right away and find out where the source is. So the best way we can do this is by educating the public, being out there on the ground with the stakeholders. We run a conference every year as well and encourage the public ownership. We carry out planning, so we're involved in the planning process for things, but also the planning at the minute with working through what we're going to do at the next cycle and where to use our resources. We monitor the water quality, and as Silke was showing you there are a lot of statistics taken into that over the whole 450 river water bodies and all the lakes, groundwater and marine. We work across the departments to get synergies and work on the key target measures across the sectors with drinking water and the natural environment division with their conservation management plans. We carry out licensing and enforcement within the consenting for discharges and agriculture. And then to combat and minimise pollution impacts, so we can combat it by education and making sure that the pollution isn't happening in the first place, or when it does happen, that the emergency pollution number signs are up and that people know to phone the 0800 number, which is 24/7, and report it so we can get the pollution stopped as soon as possible. We also work in partnership and support environmental research with universities and AFBI as well. So the partnership working, we work with rivers trusts and angling clubs and different things out in the ground. And another initiative is the Water Catchment Partnership, where we work alongside Ulster Farmers Union, Northern Ireland Water and the Voluntary Initiative. The key message for that is the safe pesticide use near water, because one tiny drop off the foil cap of a pesticide container can wipe out an Olympic-sized swimming pool of water and kill all the ecology within that. So it's very important. So we engage at agricultural shows, and there in 2019 we won an award for the stand at the Balmoral show. We carry out demonstration events and give out literature. And also in the drinking water catchments, there's been a whole lot of schemes weed wiping for the farmers, and this leaves them a legacy out in the ground with people that have the quads and the weed wiping equipment to keep that going. We also provide grants, which is brilliant because stakeholders out in the ground are so enthusiastic. There's so many clubs and voluntary groups that just love their own local river, and we couldn't be better placed than having them there to do that. So last year it was over £100,000 worth of grants were paid out for 8 projects, and they all come up really well. Then this year we've just put the letters of offer out, so we have 11 projects at over £200,000. And these work so well because the people on the ground know what the problems are with the river, and then they do matched funding. So this year they need to provide 15% matched funding, which a lot of the time can be in volunteer time. So they get the local communities involved in the river and taking an interest in the waterway. Another way is to promote the citizen science. So we have the Riverfly monitoring initiative, which takes the people out into the river with their boots, and they get to check on a small group of bugs in the river, and some of them then signify that the water has higher oxygen levels than others. And then the groups would go out once a month and check these, and if there's any deterioration, they can contact us and we can go out straight away. So where you have chemical status and you're collecting just chemicals, you can only see what's happening in the water at that time. Where the invertebrates are your video, so they're capturing everything that's went on in the previous weeks and months. So if they're deteriorating, you can see there's maybe a long-term problem happening. There are a lot of projects running, the Interact funded projects. Catchment Care, it's on the Arnie, Blackwater and Finn rivers, and they're all cross-border, looking at surface and groundwater quality improvement. And there's a land incentive scheme involved with that as well. There's a lot of school groups and education goes on, and they do have a whole lot on their website if you want to check that out. The Source to Tap project is protecting drinking water sources on the Erne and the Derg. It's €5.3 million with farms, forestry and peat restoration involved in it. Swale has Carlingford and Foyle locks, and it's dealing with the legacy of sewage treatment works. There's 35 million invested in that. SWIM is the system for bathing water quality monitoring, which is a prediction model. What used to happen with bathing waters was you would find out that the water quality was poor when you would get the results back to the lab and analyze them and then say, do you know the water you were swimming in last weekend? It's actually not the best quality for swimming in. So the model will produce early results, so you know that it's probably not wise to go there this weekend, and you find out in advance, so it'll be money well spent. So there are quite a lot with the European funding, and they're part funded by Dara as well, but you can look those all up on the website. The Living with Water project is the drainage infrastructure plan for Belfast. So the upgrades there should definitely help once that's up and running. And the environmental farming scheme, we've been working with the Knowledge Advisory Service, and this supports farmers with fencing off the waterways and creating the buffer zones as well. So riparian buffer zones. So as Silke was saying earlier, the agriculture is a big part of Northern Ireland and a big part of the source of the nutrients. We regulate these using the Nutrient Sections programme and working alongside the Knowledge Advisory Service. So AFBI is a Dara funded project on soil health, looking at policymakers and farmers how to achieve sustainable soil health. It's a new era for environmental farming schemes, and it's open for consultation in autumn 2021. Participation in the soil health project is linked to future farm support payments, so that is going to be a huge step to take the nutrients out of the waterway when it's related to the funding. So we also have many other projects going on, and some of them, the inner Dundrum Bay is looking at the issues across the department and how we're all working together as well. The SCAMP is looking at NI Water's raw abstraction points and the natural environment and improving land management practices on the ground. And the Garan Plateau Blanket Bog is restoring the bog and working with Northern Ireland Water and the Antrim Hills. So we also have integrated ecosystem modelling, and the outcome of these trial projects will inform the consenting decisions and help us prioritise for the next River Basin cycle. The trial projects, I think there's Dundrum is one of the areas, and it'll show us where we can put our money and our energy to get the greatest benefit to the water quality. So section 2, the catchment investigations. The 450 river water bodies and all the lakes and marine and groundwater, all, as Silke said, have the 5 Bann classification. For the chemical elements, many of them are measured monthly, so you have quite a lot of data coming in. And then for the biological ones, you maybe have seasonal sampling taken for them. And all of these things over the whole 6-year cycle are all put together to give you that final class. So to get the good is absolutely amazing and very difficult to do. So we do have our work cut out for us, but we also have a real wealth of information and knowledge behind every single area. So it gives us a really good starting point, because if you know what the filling element is, you can almost certainly think what the source might be at the start. So our catchment teamwork program, it's great because you don't have to sit at a computer. You can get out and about and go and get your welly boots wet. So we'll start off with the desktop study to identify the pressures, and our selected water bodies were areas that were failing for phosphorus because the SRP was an element in the deteriorations throughout the last cycle. We also looked at some areas that had a single failing element where everything else was good or better, and there was just one thing less. So the desktop study helped us to prioritize where we should get out and take samples. Then we would go out and collect the samples at bridges or wherever we could see, and narrow down the survey areas so we could get out and actually walk along and find out what the problems were on the catchment. The water quality inspectors that are based in the council areas would come out with us, and then that means that they're able to approach any polluters on site at the time as well, which is great. We produced a report from each catchment investigation last year, and they're all available on the website. So the catchment team then proceed to take forward the recommendations with the relevant government bodies and the external stakeholders to work towards good status, and having the grant scheme to back that up is really good. So one example of the catchment investigation is on Brookmount Stream in the Northeast River Basin District. It's an isolated catchment, which makes it easier because sometimes we're monitoring at a point and you have maybe 2 or 3 water bodies above it in the catchment. And if the pollution's coming from those, it's harder to track the source. So this one, it was just that isolated catchment. Most of the water body was agricultural, and the invertebrates deteriorated from moderate to poor. The morphology survey showed there was sedimentation, poor bankside habitat, culverts in the catchment, and bank trampling by cattle. So the desktop study was carried out looking at the maps on GIS. We looked at erosion risks, domestic consents, wastewater treatment works, anywhere where the source could be of pollution. We carried out soluble reactive phosphorus sampling and bridge surveys to identify other areas to target. And in the end, we realized farm businesses upstream of the problem areas seemed to be where the inputs were coming from. And they were highlighted then for nutrient management advice by the Knowledge Advisory Service. Another example then, we looked at the Davna burn, and it was moderate due to a single failing element, which was soluble reactive phosphorus. The initial desktop was carried out once again, and we sampled the phosphorus in the water. The dissolved oxygen was also checked with surveys because it can show you on the day what tributaries to start walking up, and then we did the walkover surveys. So there was elevated soluble reactive phosphorus downstream, and there was associated fertilizer application and slurry spreading, and high rainfall then running straight in. And you can see from the picture there's not a lot of a buffer strip. There's no trees along that bank at all. There was a large amount of sewage fungus on a tributary upstream, and that was sourced to an overflowed silage effluent tank. So the water quality inspector was able to go and resolve the issue on site that day. There was also evidence of a number of discharges to the waterway from an industrial source. So we are also able then to get our pollution prevention team out to investigate that. And then on to how we're prioritising and planning for the third cycle. So Silke's team have been running workshops to plan and target the work for the next 6-year cycle. And alongside that, with the consultation being out, whenever you see how we've been approaching this in the last cycle, you have your chance then to have your say on how we should target that, or what we've done so far the right way to go about it. We're planning for the Balmoral show in September, and hopefully with all the COVID regulations, that'll go straight forward. The catchment stakeholder group meeting that we hold from Water Management Unit should be held in autumn or winter, and it'll most likely be another webinar. Last year's webinar presentations are all available on the website too. And then we'll continue with the Environment Fund for the Water Quality Improvement Grants. The over £200,000 that's been pledged now for the applications is out, and the funding for those projects are between 5,000 and 30,000, and the 15% matched application funding means that we'll have a lot more of the stakeholders on the ground and people getting involved in their waterways. Back to Silke.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. Only 2 sections left then. So if you look at the program of measures over the past and the current draft plan, you probably notice that there are similarities, and you might be wondering, so are the measures working, or what about implementation? So this map here is taken from Northern Ireland Water, and it shows those cities, towns and settlements where we currently are close or at capacity and no new connections can be made to the sewage network. So during the second cycle, Northern Ireland Water had a constrained capital expenditure position, which means they weren't able to deliver all the capital projects they wanted to deliver during the second cycle. But from a strictly Water Framework Directive regulations point of view, this means that the planned measures weren't implemented completely. So if we look at the agricultural pressures, this graph is based on the outcomes of the agricultural cross-compliance inspections. Between 2008 and 2019, the average number of cross-compliance inspections carried out by NIA was 476 per year. That equals 1.4% of the farm businesses we have in Northern Ireland. The top 3 areas for non-compliance relate to pollution to a waterway, livestock manure storage requirements, or land application. Issues like spreading distances, rates and methods, and all of those 3 can impact on the water environment. So in terms of measures, so these are breaches of the NAP regulations. So in terms of measures, this means that in some areas there's inadequate implementation of the measures that were planned in the second cycle. Other evidence includes the experiences from the Source to Tap Land Incentive Scheme. In this scheme, over 220 farm businesses were visited and over 1,000 issues were identified. That's roughly 5 issues per farm visited. Now I would like to stress those issues don't all relate to breaches of the NAP regulations, but it still indicates that there are problems, and we are dealing with some cases of inadequate or incomplete implementation of measures previously identified. And the last section, what can each person living in Northern Ireland do? So as you all know, water is important to our daily lives, and we use it as a source of drinking water. It's used in our agri-food industry and manufacturing industries. It sustains marine life, and it's used by many of us for recreational activities. And hence everybody has a responsibility to ensure that our water environment is protected. So what can you do? What can I do? So probably some very obvious ones, to save water and reduce your water consumption. That doesn't only help with drinking water resources during long periods of no rain and dry spells. It also reduces the volumes of sewage that are generated and that need to be treated. And we have highlighted a couple of times in this talk that our sewage network is really under pressure, and almost to the marks that there's no spare capacity in over 100 areas. We can stop or reduce the use of weed killers in private gardens and driveways. And one drop of a pesticide contaminates an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So I'm talking, a pool 50-meter long, 2-meter deep, 10 lanes wide. And it takes considerable money, technology, and resources to clean this up again, to make sure that water would pass the drinking water standard, as just one drop of the pesticide in that swimming pool would breach the drinking water standard. You can also report sightings of invasive non-native species, either through the Habitats webpage or by downloading the iRecord app. And if you live in areas where there is no sewage network, then please make sure you maintain your septic tanks. Our colleagues in Wales have a lot of more good ideas, so please take the time and have a look at their documents and ideas on page 66 and 67. So I would like to thank you for attending the webinar this afternoon. Just a reminder, the consultation closes on the 10th of October, and we are looking forward to your consultation responses. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Silke and Mary. That was very informative, and I noticed you'd mentioned the Swell project. Some people will remember the SciWem Northern Ireland branch did a webinar a couple of months ago on that, and the good work NI Water and Irish Water are doing. And we're also have a couple of webinars on integrated environmental modelling and the Living with Water project coming up. So everybody should keep an eye out for those. So we'll quickly move on to the Q&A session. We've got Claire Vincent and Michelle McNally from Dara and also from SciWem Northern Ireland Committee on hand to help manage the questions. And Silke and I have a few colleagues as well on standby to help answer any questions if needs be. So now it's time to put your question into the Q&A function if you haven't already. I see a few there already, but while people are putting in questions, I'll start off the questions if you don't mind. Generally, have pollution incidents gone up or down in recent times, or we're winning or losing? And if things have changed, like what do you attribute the main impacts to be?
Gareth?
Take that one, Silke.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, sorry, my name is Gareth Greer. I work in the River Basin district team for the South East, which includes the pollution response side of things. So in general, pollution numbers have held relatively constant in the last number of years. We have, I suppose, overall trends in terms of folks on the line, whatever. It has been a decrease over time in terms of incidents originating from NI water sources. So from sort of early 2000s, our main pollution source would have been from wastewater treatment works, but we've seen a good decline in that over time now, such as being the investment in treatment plants and things like that. Overall, because agriculture is such a key part of our countryside and takes up a large part of our land mass, agricultural incidents have held fairly constant over the last number of years. So we do get still quite a few agricultural incidents coming through. In terms of overall numbers, has been a slight decline from early 2000s, but on average we still get around 1800 to 1900 calls a year in terms of water pollution, and roughly just over about half of those are substantiated on the ground as well. So pollution is still an ongoing issue, and we've highlighted some of those things that we're trying to do there in terms of people looking after their septic tanks properly. There's leaflets there on how to maintain, know where your drainage systems are draining to, that it's not going too straight to a waterway and things like that. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done out there in terms of pollution incidents, and there's a constant battle there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. Claire and Michelle, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Robert. Gareth, one of the questions that's come up in the Q&A is kind of linked to the last one, so I think I would ask you to take it first. Okay. It's for you again. Yeah. It's about is NIEA able to find stakeholders where pollution issue is being identified? Can this be used as a deterrent to prevent future issues?
short answer is yes, we can. It's an offence under the Water Order to cause pollution. So there will be several or a number of cases taken every year in terms of pollution to our waterway. We classify pollution incidents depending on their severity and the impact that it has on the waterway, and that can be in terms of impact on the fish or macroinvertebrate community, but also in terms of amenity as well. So we would have incidents that would affect people's ability to use a water resource or a bathing area, so that can dictate the severity of the incident. And normally for sort of medium and high severity incidents, enforcement action is taken against any polluter that is found to be that, and that can include taken to court and up to £20,000 fine. So there is the option to take people to court there and to have fines. Whether it's a sufficient deterrent or not is everybody's got their own opinion on that. But obviously all we can do is to gather the evidence and take those forward where we can find the polluter for an incident.
Thanks very much, Gareth. I think Michelle has one here.
I've got another one for you, Gareth. You're popular today. So we've one in here asking how did NIA link with DFI rivers, protect against impacts of flooding and droughts, and shape the flood risk management plans?
Okay. Well, there's quite a bit of synergy between the two plans. Both draft plans that are going to be out now they're based on the same River Basin districts. There's quite a bit of engagement between Department of Infrastructure and Dara. In IEA, there's groups like the Interdepartmental Floods Steering Group, and Silke and myself are both sitting on the technical steering group for the Floods Directive. And through those sort of interactions, we've been able to try and link up the two plans as much as we can. So part of if people that have read the flood risk management plans will see that there are proposals there for DFI and Dara to work together on agricultural support, on how maybe measures to help reduce flood risk in the catchments can be incorporated into that. For the areas of potential significant flood risk documents that have been produced, there's options there have been highlighted that will actually bring about improvements for both directives, both water quality and water quantity, and flooding issues such as reducing the runoff from catchment areas. So obviously there's a big push now in terms of natural flood management to try and reduce the amount of runoff coming from a catchment. And if we're able to do that, that also helps improve water quality as well. Separating the foul and the storm sewage, which is a hot topic as well. Obviously, there's huge water quality benefits to be derived from that, but also flooding side. So it's been really good the last couple of years that the departments have been working quite closely on this, and I'd like to see the next cycle for both Flood Directive and WFD see a lot more of those crossover areas of work happening.
Great, thank you.
We have another question come up in the Q&A here, which is a really interesting one. And I think, Silke, this might be a good one for you. In light of Brexit, what are the legal requirements, if any, for Dara to improve water quality, and what are the targets? Can you hear me, Silke? Oh, Silke may just have frozen there.
Yeah, I think she might be.
Okay.
Just in the meantime, until Silke comes back again, we still have the Water Framework Directive regulations in Northern Ireland, so we're still working away towards good status, and the objective setting at the minute then will set out what percentage we're hoping to get to good in the next cycle. Silke's still frozen, she's disappeared.
Thank you for that, Mary. So the standards haven't changed then. We are still working to, and we still have a legal requirement, importantly, to work towards the standards that we signed up to under when we were part of Europe. Mary, I'm going to follow up from that one as well. I had a question for you, actually. Just, you went through a lot of exciting, different and really novel measures and techniques. Heard about weed wiping, about grants, about partnerships. And I just wondered, well, number one, do you think there's a silver bullet for how we improve water quality, But what's your kind of what's the most exciting of all of those initiatives that you've been dealing with over recent years?
The whole thing is working with the people in the ground in that area, because every time whenever you do that, the enthusiasm of volunteers, you know, you're getting people that are getting paid going on, no, I have to go to work today. But the people are so enthusiastic on the ground and you can't buy that. So if they're actually saying to the community, come on, do you see the river, and getting them involved. So that sort of funding that we're doing, and, you know, keeping the people on the ground involved, because people really do love their waterways once they get out into them. And even for the likes of the staycations and, you know, people's recreation, opening the waterways up is definitely having an impact. And then because we have the emergency signs, they were saying about the increase in pollution incidences, but there's probably also an increase in people reporting it, because the waterways are more open now, where before, if you had one behind yourself, you'd have built a brick wall so you couldn't see it, you know. And the involvement is brilliant, because people are aware if something goes wrong, that there is a 24-hour hotline to ring as well.
So your overall message there is anything that creates partnerships and
Yeah.
excitement, actually, which
Definitely, yeah.
that those are some of the most successful ventures.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hand over to Michelle for the next question.
Yeah, Silke, you're back, so I've got one for you. So you highlighted about the importance for everybody to take ownership and do a wee bit for themselves. So what is it that for us all to do to protect and restore the water environment? What are you doing already? And, you know, what are you planning to do? What would be the main things that you would think?
Thanks, Michelle. On the spot now. So, yeah, in my own life, for example, I don't use pesticides in my own garden or any of those combined weed killers and feeds. And I also use as little detergent as possible, as I think it's always very generous what's on the package, the guidance. What I plan to do is I plan to download the app for recording and reporting the invasive species when I'm out and about. And I also plan to bring a waste bag or a bin liner in future, so when I'm out on a walk that I can pick up some of the litter and prevent it going into our water environment or breaking down into microplastics and entering the marine environment.
Is that something you've become more aware of since been doing the River Basin planning, do you think? Or do you think, you know, that's...
Definitely, yes, because it's really linking it together now in the catchment and seeing that, you know, even if you're out for a walk in your local park, that it links to your water environment, even if the beach and the marine environment is far away, it's these linkages and really seeing the small things we can all do and should all be doing, because together it makes a difference.
That's great, thank you.
There's another one come up in the Q&A, and I think, Gareth, I think it might be another one for you. It's about incentives. What incentives exist for landowners, such as farmers, to better manage land that meets riparian or corridors, so that there's buffers. Sorry, I've got this half on the screen, half off. Can be enhanced to limit surface water runoff, restrict livestock access. Any good examples?
Okay, I suppose the primary example is the environmental farming scheme. I think maybe Silke mentioned that. You know, that it's part of the wider suite of environmental measures that farmers can take advantage of through the department. So it will help fund the erection of fencing and buffer strips along waterways. So that's the key mechanism. Lots of the Interreg works that the Rivers Trust and other groups are doing also do this type of work themselves. So most of those local groups have some of the funding that Mary had mentioned that will go towards putting up fences and buffer strips as well. So from a landowner's point of view, the environmental farming scheme is the key route to do that. And there's lots of information on the Dara website about that. Obviously, we're coming into a new era of new environmental farming policy and new agri-environment schemes. So over the next couple of years, we're hoping to be able to develop those schemes to make them more attractive, but also to potentially do more from a water quality point of view as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I see another one in here that I think probably be Stephanie, one for you. So the question is, given that the PE funding is likely to be tight for the next number of years, how are programs or interventions prioritised?
Thanks, Michelle. And I suppose I'm making a big assumption here when they're making reference to PE funding, that it's funding into the infrastructure for wastewater treatment works, unless any of the other panel members know what the PE could stand for. But I suppose from our perspective on the wastewater infrastructure and NI water investment, there's a significant prioritisation programme that has been in place since 2007, whenever they went GOCO, and that prioritisation is based on compliance with regulations, and pollution incidents, major pressures in certain environmental settings, and that it's a significant scoring matrix that helps us identify where we can get the best bang for the buck and improve water quality significantly. But the key driver is legislative compliance from that perspective. So we just have to keep beating the drum to try and get the investment that NI Water need. Luckily for this year, as we commence in PC21, which is a significant investment plan for our wastewater infrastructure, they've been managed to secure their first year of the 6-year financial plan, and we just have to keep shouting that wastewater in Northern Ireland needs significant level of funding and will do so for the next 20 to 30 years. So hope that answers the question.
I think so.
Thanks very much, Steph. There's another question in, and this is the $1 million question actually, where somebody, as an anonymous attendee, has said, well, the previous efforts are commendable, but actually we haven't met Water Framework Directive and requirements. And what is our confidence that this is going to be any different this time? Now, I don't know quite who wants to take that one. Whether that's still, or maybe Wendy, would you like to have a go at that one from a freshwater perspective? Maybe that's the way to take it. You're on top of all the freshwater data.
Yes, yeah, certainly I can give a few pointers, I suppose. As Mary had already indicated, actually getting to good is extremely challenging because of the broad range of parameters that are all measured. When we're looking at particularly on the rivers and lake side of the house from my perspective. And although underneath the data, we see certain things improving, what we found certainly towards the middle of the last cycle, so around 2018 when we did our last lot of updates, was that the nutrient issues, particularly the soluble reactive phosphorus, was becoming more of a problem. So any gains we made on the one hand were actually then being sort of wiped out by the increasing phosphorus on the other. So I suppose what we've learned from that is that a closer look has been taken now at those changes, particularly in the agricultural sector, and Silke has already outlined an awful lot of that evidence, and obviously there's a lot more there, and there's a document we've published in support of the plans with more detail. And really what we've sort of tracked it back to with working with colleagues in the department and AFBI is increasing levels of phosphorus in soil. And so we're very pleased to see proposals coming forward now in how soil nutrient health scheme and soil monitoring will inform actions going forward in the future agri-environment policies and agricultural policies. The only downside is the time it will take to actually see those improvements on the ground. But as Stephanie indicated as well, all of these issues, it takes a long time to resolve them. And I think, in all honesty, Water Framework Directive was always rather ambitious in the timeframes it set out. And across Europe, we're pretty much in step with everybody else, you know, in terms of the progress that's been made. We have to commit to this in the long haul. And, you know, going forward, we've got more and more evidence to help us do that. So I hope that's a bit of an indication of where we are now.
Yeah, I agree, Wendy. And I was thinking as well, a lot of the measures that we have started during this cycle like you were saying about the long-term recovery, because a lot of the inter-egg projects and a lot of the environmental farming schemes, they've all been up and running this cycle, but you won't start to see the improvements then until into the next cycle. So hopefully we will see a bit of benefit out of them all.
Thank you, Wendy and Mary. And I noticed a comment in there from Alan Strong as well in the chat about taking away greater interdepartmental and interdisciplinary thinking. And I think you're absolutely right there, Alan, that is key. And something that through all these projects, there's definitely much more bite and move in that direction. And I think people are capturing the vision. One that I'm involved in is the Dundrum Bay one, which is about improving water quality in the Dundrum Bay, in the bay itself, but also in the river catchments. And that's work that was started by Northern Ireland Water, working with AFBI. And we've now moved on to phase 2, where we're working directly with, or we're going to be working directly with the farming communities and the Rivers Trust. So again, a wee bit like Mary said, all about partnership working, collaborations, and really getting down into the catchments about what are the actual problems on the ground. There is no, I think the answer to my last question is there is no silver bullet. This is difficult. This is really tough. So thanks for your comment there, Alan. I will hand over to Michelle. I think there's more questions coming through in the chat.
Yeah, this one I suppose probably go maybe to Silke and possibly a few other panel members might want to comment on it too. Clearly there's a difficult balance to be struck between economy and environment. Do you think that increasing resources directed to inspections on industry and agriculture would help overcome many of the problems seen?
Yeah, if we go back to, if you recall the presentation, you know, we have backtracked our results from the monitoring back to the source, and we know we need to look at the sources and minimize those where we can't eliminate them. And I said that's where, you know, the codes of practice and what have you come in, and inspections definitely help to see if this is implemented properly and if it's doing what it's supposed to do. And it goes 2 ways. It helps us to implement the measures, but it also helps us to inform where areas of greater risk are when we plan almost the next cycle. If we have information of non-compliance, then we know that these water bodies are at greater risk, and we can target actions and monitoring in those areas. So that's a 2-way street almost.
Probably just add, Silke, in terms of inspections being involved in that side of things. You know, we're never going to inspect every single farm and every single industry, so we need, there is a role for inspections, and certainly where areas are found to be in non-compliance with the regulations, then action that will be taken in those. But it's, to answer the question, it's not going to solve the problems for us. You know, we need all areas of industry and agriculture to sort of raise their game and say that these are the standards that we must keep here. And as Wendy mentioned, it shouldn't really overlook the future agricultural policy framework, you know, where we are, the proposal to link resilience payments to undertaking soil sampling and nutrient management planning. Again, that will be a huge help to us all in terms of reducing that overall phosphorus load that is already built up in the soils, but it's going to take time for that to be used up through growing crops and use of that land. So we have to know what it is there in the first place. So it's a great first start, this, I think, yeah.
Great, thanks very much, guys.
Sorry, Michelle, if I just come in there just on the point source discharges, mainly from industry and our sewage infrastructure. I think compliance inspections are a critical element of how we regulate the point source discharges. But again, like what Silke and Gareth have said, it's one tool in the box, and we've got an awful lot of other mechanisms and measures that we are starting to implement to improve how we regulate. It's setting the standards at a level that ensures ensures that we can protect the environment and improve and enhance. And it's back to that integrated approach, bringing together the whole catchment, looking at flows as well as quality, and it's putting the jigsaw pieces together that will make the difference, in particular on the sewage side, where we can really drive home improvements through that capital investment scheme. So I suppose it's just one of the tools in the box, along with a whole raft of other regulatory kits that we've got.
Great. Thanks very much, guys.
So I think we've a comment in there from Peter Archdale about effective environmental sampling to provide evidence alongside effective enforcement remain key. And I don't think anybody would argue with that, Peter. Your comment's well made. There's just one last question in the Q&A, and it is around, again, around EU exit. And are we still at risk of EU infraction at the moment? And Silke, I'm wondering if you would like to take that one.
Definitely what has happened to date and up to December, we are at risk of infraction. You know, when it comes to what have we done in the second cycle and implementation of measures and achieving targets. And then going forward, you know, we will have the Office of Environmental Protection who is going to take over the roles the Commission's had. And we will learn more details in the future as this gets up and running. And for now, the regulations which transpose the directive into Northern Ireland law, they are still there. And essentially, we're still working to the same targets and rules and objectives we had previously.
Thanks, Silke. And I think there's a 5-year. We're tied in for 5 years, isn't that right? To see.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's it. So that's all still a live risk currently. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, so I will hand back over to Robert. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up for today, guys. So thanks again to Silke and Mary. A really informative presentation. It was clear there's a lot of work put into that, so thanks very much. And also thanks to the panelists. I think everybody got a go at talking there, so thank you. And thank you for everybody that turned up today for today's webinar. So our next webinar from the SciWem Northern Ireland branch is on the 27th of October. And that is linked into this. This is integrated environmental modelling, so keep an eye out on social media for that one. So with that being said, thanks to everybody, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.